If they catch me past the border, bury us both beneath the same tree." Clara Whitmore whispered the words to the night because there was no one left to hear them, not the guards who hunted exiles through the northern woods, not the pack that had thrown her mother's name into shame, not Marion Whitmore, whose still body lay wrapped in a faded quilt on the little handcart behind her. Snow drifted over the forbidden road in soft white sheets, hiding the old wagon ruts and softening the sharp black stones that marked the edge of Blackwood territory. Clara's fingers were numb around the cart handle. Her boots had soaked through miles ago. Every breath burned her throat like frost, yet she kept moving, one careful step after another, because turning back meant leaving her mother in foreign soil, and Marion had asked for only one thing before the fever took her voice. "Take me home, Clara. Even if they hate us. Home." The word felt almost cruel now. Clara had been 12 when Caleb Voss ordered them beyond the border with 2 bags, 1 blanket, and a warning never to return. He had called Marion a traitor. He had called Clara bad blood. The pack had watched from their warm doorways as mother and daughter crossed into the empty lands where no proper wolf chose to live. For 10 years, Clara learned how to survive quietly. She patched roofs for strangers. She traded herbs for bread. She lowered her eyes when dominant wolves passed too close. She told herself she did not need a pack, did not need a name, did not need anyone to believe her mother was innocent. But death had a way of stripping lies down to bone. Marion had not asked for revenge. She had not asked for justice. She had only asked to be buried beneath the white willow at the old cemetery, where Clara's father was never mentioned and where every answer seemed to begin. The border stones rose ahead, half buried beneath the snow, each one carved with the sigil of the royal wolf. Clara stopped before them. Her heart struck hard against her ribs. Beyond this line, exiles had no protection. Beyond this line, the law could swallow her whole and call it order. A low howl rolled through the pine trees, distant but clear. Clara froze. Another answered from the east, closer this time. Patrols. She tightened her grip on the cart and pushed forward. The wheels groaned softly. "I'm sorry, Mama," she breathed, though she did not know whether she was apologizing for being afraid or for taking so long. The forest changed the moment she crossed. The air felt heavier, older, scented with cedar, ice, and something wild that made the quiet wolf inside her soul stir for the first time in years. Clara ignored it. She followed the narrow deer trail Marion had described, past the split boulder, down the slope, through the stand of silver birch until the cemetery appeared below, pale and forgotten under moonlight. The white willow stood at its center, its bare branches moving like fingers through the falling snow. Clara nearly sobbed at the sight of it. She had made it. Then the cart stopped. Not because of the snow. Because the grave beneath the willow was already open. Clara's breath vanished. A dark figure stood beside it, tall and motionless, his black cloak untouched by the storm, his silver-gray eyes fixed on her as if he had been waiting for years. On his chest, the royal wolf sigil gleamed. Clara knew that face from every whispered warning in the exile lands. King Adrian Blackwood looked down at Marion's covered body, then back at Clara, and said softly, "You came too late." Clara could not move. The open grave waited beneath the white willow like a question the earth had already answered, its edges clean, the dark soil placed neatly to one side despite the falling snow. No shovel lay nearby. No lantern burned. Only King Adrian Blackwood stood there, silent and impossibly still, as though the storm itself had chosen not to touch him. Clara's hands slipped from the cart handle, and the wood settled with a soft creak behind her. "Your Majesty," she whispered, but the words came out thin, almost lost to the wind. She dropped to her knees before she could think better of it, not in worship, not in loyalty, but in the old reflex of an Omega who had learned that lowering herself quickly could sometimes keep the world from taking more. "I did not come to steal. I did not come to trespass for myself. I only came to bury my mother." Adrian's gaze did not leave the quilt-wrapped shape on the cart. For a moment, his face revealed nothing, no anger, no judgment, no mercy she could understand. Then he took one step closer, and Clara felt the force of him in the air, not loud, not cruel, simply undeniable, like the hush before thunder. "Stand up," he said. Clara did not. Her knees pressed deeper into the snow. "Please. I will leave before sunrise. No one has to know." His jaw tightened, and something unreadable crossed his silver-gray eyes. "I said stand, Clara Whitmore." Her head lifted. He knew her name. Not just Marion's daughter. Not exile. Not stray. Clara Whitmore. The sound of it in his voice unsettled her more than any threat could have. Slowly, she rose, keeping her hands visible, her breath trembling white between them. "How do you know who I am?" Adrian looked past her toward the tree line, where the patrol howls had gone quiet. "Because your mother made me promise I would." The world seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. She gripped the cart handle again, not to move it, but to keep herself upright. "My mother never knew you." The words came fast, defensive, desperate. "She would have told me." "No," Adrian said softly. "She would have protected you." Clara stared at him, searching for cruelty, for some royal game she was too tired to understand. But his voice held a sorrow so old it frightened her. He moved toward the cart, and Clara stepped between him and Marion before instinct could stop her. It was foolish. He was the Alpha King. She was an exiled Omega with frozen hands and no allies within miles. Still, she lifted her chin. "Do not touch her unless you mean to honor her." Adrian stopped. For the first time, his expression changed. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to recognition. "She raised you brave." Clara's throat tightened. "She raised me poor." Brave was just what was left. The king lowered his eyes, and when he spoke again, his words were almost hidden beneath the snow. Her name was not only Marion Whitmore. Clara's pulse stumbled. Adrian turned toward the open grave beneath the willow, where moonlight silvered the untouched ground. Before they erased her, before men with smaller hearts called her traitor, she was Marion of the Silver House. Clara shook her head. The name meant nothing and everything at once. Silver House was a story told in fragments, a fallen bloodline, a forbidden crest, a family no one mentioned unless they wanted the room to go quiet. "No," she whispered. "My mother was a seamstress. She mended coats. She baked bread in a stove that smoked all winter. She saved every spare penny in a cracked jar under the floor. And before that," Adrian said, his voice low and steady, "she saved a kingdom that never thanked her." A branch snapped somewhere beyond the cemetery. Clara turned sharply. Torches flickered between the trees, amber light breaking through the blue dark. Men were coming, several of them, boots crunching over frozen ground. Adrian did not look away from Clara. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever you hear tonight, do not let them make you ashamed of her." The first guard emerged from the pines, then another, then a broad-shouldered man in a fur-lined coat Clara remembered from every nightmare of exile. Caleb Voss smiled when he saw her. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the graves, "the little border ghost finally came crawling home." Caleb Voss stepped into the cemetery as if the dead themselves had invited him to pass judgment. Four border guards followed behind him with torches held high, their orange flames bending in the wind and throwing restless light across the white willow, the open grave, and Clara standing beside her mother's cart with snow in her hair. For one sharp second, she was 12 again, clutching Marion's hand while Caleb's voice rang through the village square, ordering them out beyond the stones before sunset. She remembered the smell of rain on packed dirt, the faces turned away, the way her mother had kept walking even when Clara begged to know what they had done wrong. Now Caleb looked older, broader, his beard trimmed with gray, but his smile had not changed. It still carried the easy confidence of a man who believed the world would always agree with him. "I wondered how long grief would take to make you foolish," he said. Clara's fingers curled into the edge of Marion's quilt. "I came for a burial. You came across a sealed border." His eyes moved to the cart, then to the open grave beneath the willow. And you brought that woman back onto sacred land after she was lawfully cast out. The word struck Clara harder than the cold. That woman. Not Marion. Not Mother. Not the tired woman who had worked until her hands cracked, who sang softly while mending torn sleeves, who went hungry in winter so Clara could eat. Clara lifted her chin, even as her throat tightened. Her name was Marion Whitmore. Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. That was the name she hid behind. Clara felt Adrian shift beside her, barely a movement, but the cemetery seemed to notice. The guards lowered their torches a fraction. Caleb's smile faltered when his gaze finally settled on the king. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head with the stiff respect of a man caught doing something he had not expected to explain. "We received word of a border breach. I did not realize you were already handling the matter." Adrian's voice was calm. Clearly. One word, quiet enough to be polite, heavy enough to make the guards look at the ground. Caleb recovered quickly. "Then you know this girl has no right here. Her mother was stripped of pack burial privileges. The daughter left with her. The law is very plain." "The law is rarely plain when men use it to cover fear," Adrian said. Clara turned toward him before she could stop herself. There was no warmth in his face, but there was a steadiness that made her breath catch. No one had ever stood between Caleb Voss and her before. No one who could survive it. Caleb's expression tightened. "With respect, this is not fear. This is order." Marion was accused by witnesses, judged by counsel, and exiled for endangering the crown. If her daughter has returned, she should be detained until the elders decide whether further punishment is required. Clara's pulse rushed in her ears. Detained. Elders. Punishment. The words stacked around her like walls. She looked at her mother's covered face beneath the quilt and felt something inside her bend, not break, but bend toward a place she had spent years avoiding. "No," she said. The cemetery went still. Caleb slowly turned his head. "What did you say?" Clara's voice shook, but it did not disappear. "I said no. I will answer for crossing the border after she is buried. Not before." Caleb's eyes hardened. "You do not give terms here, Omega." The title was meant to shrink her. It always had. Clara felt it press at her shoulders, at the back of her neck, at every old lesson that told her survival meant silence. But Marion had not crossed miles of poverty and sickness and shame just to be returned to the dark unremembered. Clara placed one hand over the quilt where her mother's shoulder would have been. "She was my mother," Clara said, each word small but clear. "That is enough." For a moment, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Caleb moved forward, his gloved hand lifting as if to seize the cart handle and pull Marion away from the grave. Clara stepped in front of it. Fear flashed through her, bright and bitter, but she did not move aside. Caleb leaned close enough that she could smell pine smoke on his coat. "You should have stayed lost." His hand reached past her toward the quilt. Before his fingers touched it, Adrian was there. Not with a shout. Not with a display. One moment he stood beneath the willow, the next his hand closed around Caleb's wrist in the torchlight, stopping him with effortless precision. The guards froze. Clara could not breathe. Adrian's silver-gray eyes remained fixed on Caleb's face, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough for the graves to hear. "Do not make me repeat myself in front of her mother." Caleb's face went pale beneath the torchlight, but pride held him upright long after wisdom should have made him step back. Adrian released his wrist with the same quiet control he had used to stop him, and Caleb immediately pulled his hand against his chest, not wounded, only stunned by the fact that he had been stopped at all. The border guards stared at the snow near their boots. No one wanted to be the first to breathe too loudly. Clara stood beside the cart, her body trembling from cold and fear and something far more unfamiliar. Protection had always been a story that happened to other women, women with families behind them, women with names that opened doors instead of closing them. Yet the Alpha King remained between her and Caleb as if the space around her mother's body had become royal ground. "Your Majesty," Caleb said carefully, smoothing his voice until it almost sounded respectful, "I only meant to preserve the law." Adrian did not look impressed. "Then learn the law before you wear it like a crown." The words landed softly, but every guard heard them. Caleb's mouth tightened. Exiles cannot claim burial rights in Blackwood territory. A daughter may bury her mother under blood right, provided no challenge is made before the grave is opened. Adrian's gaze shifted to the dark earth waiting beneath the white willow. The grave is open. Clara swallowed hard. She had not known that law. Caleb clearly had, and the anger that flashed through his eyes told her he had hoped she would not. "That protection was written for loyal blood," Caleb said. "Not for families disgraced by treason." The air changed. It was subtle at first, a hush beneath the wind, a pressure that made the torches flicker lower. Adrian turned fully toward him. "No court in my reign convicted Marion Whitmore of treason. The council records state, the council records were sealed before I took the throne." Caleb went still. Clara's heart beat so hard she felt it in her fingertips. Sealed records. A name erased. A past everyone had spoken of as truth, but no one had allowed her to see. Adrian's voice lowered. "You will not use hidden papers to deny a dead woman the dignity you refused her in life." For a moment, the cemetery seemed to widen around Clara. The willow, the snow, the waiting grave, the king in black, Caleb with his torches and borrowed authority, all of it became sharp and unreal. She wanted to ask why Adrian cared. She wanted to ask why he knew the laws that could save her and the records that had condemned her mother. But Marion lay between them, and grief gave Clara only one clear task. She moved to the cart. No one stopped her. With careful hands, she drew back the quilt enough to reveal her mother's face. Peaceful beneath the pale light, thinner than Clara wanted to remember but still beloved in every line. The guards lowered their eyes. Even Caleb said nothing. Clara found the small linen pouch tied around her wrist and opened it. Inside was a handful of soil from the exile cottage, gathered from the place where Marion had planted rosemary every spring. She wanted both, Clara whispered, more to herself than anyone. The place that took her in, and the place that sent her away. Adrian stepped closer, not touching, only near enough for his presence to steady the night. Together, with slow reverence, the guards lifted Marion from the cart at the king's silent command and lowered her into the grave beneath the white willow. Clara expected to break then. Instead, a strange calm moved through her, fragile but real. She took the first handful of soil and let it fall. The moment it touched the grave, a silver glow bloomed beneath her fingers. Clara gasped and stumbled back. The light spread in delicate threads through the snow, tracing the roots of the white willow like moonlight running through water. The guards whispered in alarm. Caleb took one step away, his face tightening with something that looked too much like fear. Clara stared at her own hand. The glow faded slowly, leaving warmth in her palm where there should have been only cold. Adrian looked at the shining earth, then at Clara, and all the sorrow he had been holding behind his eyes rose close to the surface. "The bloodline did not die with Marion," he said. The silver light faded from the roots of the white willow, but it did not leave the cemetery unchanged. Every face around Clara had shifted. The guards who had looked at her like a trespasser now watched her as if the snow had opened and revealed something ancient beneath their feet. Caleb Voss stood rigid beyond the grave, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on Clara's hand with a fear he tried too hard to bury. Clara curled her fingers into her palm, hiding the lingering warmth. "What was that?" she whispered. Adrian did not answer quickly. He looked at Marion's grave, at the first soil resting gently over the quilt, and his expression became guarded. Again, not cold, but careful. "Not here." Caleb stepped forward at once. "Your Majesty, with respect, that display only proves she is dangerous. An unknown power in an exile, tied to a condemned bloodline, cannot be ignored." "It will not be ignored," Adrian said. "It will be protected until the truth is brought into the open." The word protected moved through Clara like a sound she did not know how to trust. She almost laughed from exhaustion. Protected by whom? The same kingdom that had left her mother to die poor and nameless beyond the border? The same laws that had turned a grieving daughter into a criminal before she could finish a burial prayer? She looked down at Marian's grave and forced herself to breathe. I am not leaving her unfinished. Adrian's gaze softened by the smallest degree. Then finish. No one spoke while Clara took handful after handful of soil and laid them over her mother. The guards helped in silence, not with ceremony, but with respect. Caleb did not help. He watched, and his stillness felt like a promise of trouble waiting beyond the trees. When the grave was covered, Clara placed both palms on the mound and bowed her head. She had imagined this moment for miles, imagined sobbing, collapsing, begging the moon to give her one more hour with Marian. Instead, only a quiet emptiness opened inside her, wide as the winter sky. You are home, she whispered. I did what you asked. A warm weight settled around her shoulders. Clara startled. Adrian had removed his black cloak and placed it over her without making a show of it. It smelled faintly of cedar, frost, and the clean smoke of a distant fire. You are shaking, he said. Clara wanted to refuse it. Pride rose quickly, foolishly, the only shield she had left. But the cloak was warm, and grief had taken too much strength for pride to carry. Thank you, she said, barely above a breath. Adrian turned to the guards. Escort Miss Whitmore to Blackwood Keep. Caleb's head snapped toward him. The keep? Yes. She should be held at the border station. Adrian's eyes cut to him. She has stood in the cold beside her mother's grave long enough. Caleb's mouth thinned, but he bowed. As you command. Clara did not miss the way he said it, as if obedience were only a mask he could remove later. The ride to Blackwood Keep passed in a blur of moonlit pines and frozen road. Clara sat in the back of a covered carriage, wrapped in the king's cloak, her damp boots tucked beneath the hem of her dress. Adrian rode ahead on a dark horse, his posture straight, his presence impossible to mistake even through the falling snow. By the time the keep appeared, rising from the cliffs like a fortress carved out of midnight, Clara's fear had gone quiet and deep. She was taken through tall iron gates, past soldiers who stared but did not speak, and into a stone hall warmer than any place she had known in years. A gray-haired woman in a plain blue dress waited near the staircase. Her eyes filled the moment she saw Clara. Miss Whitmore, she said softly. I am Nora Bell. I served your mother once. Clara's breath caught. Before she could answer, Nora pressed something into her hand, small and hard, wrapped in a strip of faded cloth. She told me that if you ever came back, you should have this. Clara unfolded the cloth with numb fingers. In her palm lay a silver ring, old and delicate, engraved with the same black wolf sigil that marked the throne of Blackwood. Clara stared at the ring until the edges of the room blurred. The black wolf sigil was so small it should not have frightened her, yet it seemed to carry the weight of the entire keep, the iron gates, the silent soldiers, the king who had waited at her mother's grave. Nora Bell stood before her with folded hands, her eyes shining in a way that made Clara feel both seen and cornered. Why would my mother have this? Clara asked. Her voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Nora glanced toward the upper hall, where the shadows gathered beneath old portraits of kings and queens whose painted eyes watched everything. That is not my truth to tell. Clara closed her fingers around the ring. The metal was warmer than it should have been. Everyone keeps saying that. Not here. Not now. Not mine to tell. She was my mother. If there is truth left, it belongs to me. Nora's expression folded with quiet sorrow. Before she could answer, a door opened at the end of the corridor. King Adrian Blackwood stepped into the lamplight without his cloak, dressed in dark riding clothes dusted with melting snow. The hall changed when he entered. It did not grow louder or colder. It simply became aware of him. Clara turned toward him and held up the ring. Did this belong to you? Adrian stopped. For the first time since she had seen him beside the grave, his control slipped. Only for a breath, only in the tightening of his mouth and the sudden stillness of his eyes, but Clara saw it. The ring meant something. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "Nora gave it to me." Clara took one step closer, too tired to be careful. "She said my mother wanted me to have it if I ever came back. So I am asking you again. Did it belong to you?" Adrian looked at Nora. The older woman bowed her head and withdrew without a sound, leaving Clara alone with the king in a hall large enough to make any whisper feel like a confession. Adrian approached slowly, not like a ruler closing distance, but like a man walking toward a memory he had avoided for years. "It belonged to my house," he said. "That is not an answer." "No," he admitted. "It is not." Clara hated the tremble in her hands, so she tightened them into fists. "Caleb said my mother was a traitor. You said she saved a kingdom. Nora said she served her. This ring bears your crest. If my mother lied to me, I need to know why." Adrian's eyes softened, and the gentleness in them unsettled her more than anger would have. Marian did not lie because she wanted to. She hid the truth because people were hunting anything connected to the Silver House. Why? Because the Silver House carried a gift no army could command and no council could control. They could heal old wounds in the land itself. They could calm broken bonds. They could call light into places where the wolf spirit had gone silent. Clara looked down at her hand, remembering the silver glow at the grave, the warmth that had moved through the frozen soil. "That is not possible. You saw it tonight." "I saw grief do something strange." Adrian took another step closer, then stopped when she stiffened. He noticed. He did not force the distance smaller. "Years ago, before I wore the crown, the northern border fell under a curse. Not the kind sung about in stories. A quiet one. Crops failed. Wolves lost their sense of home. Families turned against one another over old fears. I rode into the dead zone because I was young enough to think courage made me untouchable." His gaze lowered to the ring in her palm. "Marian found me there when no one else could. She brought me back." Clara's anger faltered. In his voice, her mother was not a criminal or a rumor. She was brave. She was real. Then why was she exiled? Adrian's silence stretched too long. Somewhere outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Because she hid a child the council wanted under royal protection. Clara's breath caught. What child? Adrian looked at her then, fully, and she felt the answer before he spoke it. Not in words. In the warmth of the ring. In the silver light still sleeping beneath her skin. In the way her mother had never spoken of the past without looking toward the north. "Your mother did not cross the border to escape me, Clara," Adrian said quietly. "She crossed it to hide you." Clara did not sleep before the trial. She sat beside the tall window of the guest chamber while dawn slowly turned the mountains from black to blue, the silver ring resting in her open palm. The room was warm, with a clean quilt, a pitcher of water, and a fire kept low in the hearth, but comfort felt almost insulting after years of earning every safe hour with silence. Her mother had hidden her. The words kept circling back, soft as snow, heavy as stone. Marian had not been running from shame. She had been running with a secret large enough to bend a kingdom around it. By sunrise, the keep had changed. Footsteps moved below. Voices gathered behind doors. Messengers crossed the courtyard on horseback, and Clara understood that Caleb had not gone quietly into the night. He had carried his version of the story to every elder willing to listen. When Nora Bell entered with a plain gray dress and a cup of tea, her face held the careful kindness of someone preparing a child for bad weather. "The council has assembled," she said. Clara closed her hand around the ring. "Am I their prisoner?" Nora hesitated. "You are under royal protection." Clara almost smiled. "That sounds like a prettier room for the same cage." Nora lowered her eyes, but before she could answer, a knock came at the door. Adrian stood in the hallway, dressed in black formal clothes with the royal crest at his shoulder. He looked every inch a king, distant and untouchable, until his gaze found Clara's tired face. Then something in him softened. "You do not have to face them alone," he said. Clara stood, slipping the ring into the small pocket of her dress. "I have faced men like them my whole life. Not like this." "No," she admitted. "This time they are afraid of me." The council hall was built from dark stone and old pride. High windows spilled pale winter light across rows of polished benches where elders, border captains, and noble wolves waited in silence. Clara felt their attention settle over her the moment she entered, measuring her dress, her lowered shoulders, her omega scent, her exile history, all the little things people used when they wanted to decide a soul before hearing it speak. Adrian walked at her side but did not touch her. Somehow, that made his support stronger. He was not dragging her forward. He was letting everyone see she had chosen to stand. Caleb Voss waited near the center of the hall, clean and composed, his fur-lined coat replaced by council blue. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing just enough. "We come only to preserve the safety of Blackwood territory." Adrian took his place before the throne but remained standing. "Then speak plainly." Caleb turned to the council. "Last night, an exiled Omega crossed a sealed border carrying the body of a woman lawfully cast out for crimes against the crown. At the grave, this same Omega produced an unknown magical sign tied to a disgraced house. We cannot allow grief to blind us to danger." Clara felt the word danger pass through the room. It landed on her skin like cold rain. Caleb looked at her then, his voice sharpening. "Clara Whitmore has no verified pack status, no recorded blood claim, and no witness. Except a dead mother who built her life on lies." The hall murmured. Clara's hands tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. Adrian's expression did not change, though the air around him seemed to grow still. "Miss Whitmore may answer," he said. Clara stepped forward. Her knees wanted to tremble. She let them. Courage was not the absence of shaking. It was standing where fear told you not to. "I do not know what my mother was before exile," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I know what she became after it. She became the woman who worked through fever so I could eat. The woman who taught me not to hate a pack that hated us first. The woman who asked to be buried at home because love outlived shame." The murmurs faded. Caleb's mouth tightened. "Sentiment does not prove innocence." "No," Clara said, turning to him. "But cruelty does not prove guilt." A few elders looked away. For the first time, Caleb's confidence cracked at the edges. Then an older councilman rose, his silver beard resting against his collar. "If she claims Silver House blood, let the blood answer." Clara felt every eye shift to her. Adrian's jaw hardened. "That right has not been used in years." "Because no heir survived," Caleb said quickly. "If she is false, the matter ends." The councilman gestured to a shallow stone basin at the center of the hall, filled with clear water from the mountain spring. Clara approached it slowly. Her reflection stared back, pale, exhausted, uncertain. She thought of Marion under the white willow. She thought of the ring hidden in her pocket. She placed her fingers on the rim. Nothing happened. Caleb exhaled, almost smiling. Then pain flashed across Adrian's face. He gripped the arm of the throne, his old border wound glowing faintly beneath his sleeve. The hall stirred in alarm, but no one stepped close. Clara turned before anyone told her to. She crossed the space between them and took his hand with both of hers. Silver light bloomed through her fingers, warm and bright, and the entire council fell silent. The silver light spread from Clara's hands into Adrian's, moving with a gentleness that made the entire hall feel suddenly too loud in its silence. It was not fire. It was not a weapon. It was warmth, clear and steady, like sunlight finding its way through winter glass. Adrian stood still beneath it, his silver-gray eyes fixed on Clara with an expression she could not name. Pain had tightened his face only moments before, but now the strain eased from his jaw, then from his shoulders, then from the hand that had gripped the throne as if it were the only thing holding him upright. Clara should have let go. A proper Omega did not stand before a council holding the king's hand while every noble wolf in Blackwood territory watched. A frightened exile did not touch royal blood without permission. But something deeper than fear guided her fingers around his, something quiet and sure that seemed to know the shape of him before her mind could understand it. Beneath her touch, the faint glow at his wrist softened and faded. A murmur moved through the council benches, not the sharp sound of judgment this time, but uncertainty. Caleb Voss looked as if the floor had shifted beneath him. "Trickery," he said, too quickly. "A staged display." The king was never in danger. Adrian turned his head slowly, and Caleb's words died under that gaze. Clara released Adrian's hand at last, but the warmth stayed in her palms. She felt strangely hollow, as if something inside her had opened a door and revealed a room she had never been allowed to enter. Then she heard it. Not with her ears, but somewhere behind her heartbeat. A low, distant sound, soft as breath over snow. Her wolf. Clara froze. All her life, the presence inside her had been faint, a timid shadow at the edge of pain and shame. Pack women had whispered that her wolf was weak. Caleb had once laughed that Clara's spirit was too afraid to come out. But now that quiet presence lifted its head. Not fierce. Not cruel. Silver. Awake. Adrian seemed to hear it too. His eyes changed, not in color, but in recognition. "Clara," he said softly, and her name in his voice steadied the part of her that wanted to run. The older councilman with the silver beard rose from his seat, his face pale with awe. Only Silver House blood can answer a cursed wound with light. Caleb stepped away from the basin. One moment proves nothing. Her mother still betrayed the crown. The records remain. "Then bring the records," Adrian said. Caleb's eyes flickered. They were sealed by council authority. "I am the crown." The hall went still again, this time with the kind of stillness that gathers before truth breaks something open. Adrian looked toward the doors. Nora Bell. The gray-haired woman entered carrying a small wooden box bound with a faded blue ribbon. Clara recognized the ribbon at once. Marian had worn one like it around her wrist on hard days, always turning the knot with her thumb when she thought Clara was not watching. Nora walked to the center of the hall and bowed her head. "I kept what Lady Marian gave me before she was forced beyond the border. She said the truth would not be safe until her daughter stood beneath royal protection." Caleb's face drained of color. That woman was a servant. Her word cannot overturn council judgment. Nora did not look at him. She looked at Clara. "Your mother was never a servant to me." She opened the box. Inside lay a bundle of letters, a broken seal stamped with the Silver House crest, and a small leather journal worn soft at the corners. Clara's breath caught. Marian's handwriting marked the cover in careful, familiar strokes. Nora lifted the journal as if it were something sacred. She wrote everything. Adrian gave a single nod. "Read the final page." Nora opened the journal near the end, her hands trembling only slightly. Her voice filled the hall, quiet but clear. "If Adrian ever finds my daughter, tell him I did not hide her because I feared him. I hid her because others feared what she would become. Tell Clara she was loved before she was hunted, and tell the king she was always meant to be his moon." The words settled over Clara like snow over a grave, soft, cold, and impossible to push away. She looked at Adrian, and he looked back at her with sorrow, wonder, and something so careful it felt almost like a promise. Caleb spoke her mother's name like an accusation. Nora had spoken it like a prayer. And for the first time in Clara's life, the room did not look at her as an exile. They looked at her as the truth everyone had tried to bury. The journal did not raise its voice, yet it changed the hall more completely than any command could have. Nora read page after page, each one carrying Marian's careful hand back into a room that had once erased her. Clara stood very still while the truth unfolded around her. Marian had not stolen royal secrets. She had discovered that certain border elders were hiding the spread of the curse to protect their own influence. She had warned the young Prince Adrian. She had helped him survive the dead zone. And when Clara was born beneath a silver moon, with the old gift sleeping in her blood, those same men saw not a child, but a threat to every lie they had built. Caleb's name appeared near the end. Not as a loyal witness. Not as a defender of order. As the man who had delivered false testimony, the man who had pressed the council to exile Marian before Adrian returned from the northern campaign, the man who had declared the infant dead so the search would end before it began. Clara heard the words, but for a while she could not feel them. Her mind held only simple pictures, her mother cutting bread into 2 uneven pieces and giving Clara the larger one, her mother smiling through fever, her mother watching the northern sky with eyes full of things she would never say. All those years, Marian had carried the weight of innocence without anyone to believe her. The hall had gone quiet enough that Clara could hear the wind against the high windows. Caleb stood near the basin, his face ashen, but still he tried to gather himself behind old authority. A grieving woman's private writings are not proof, he said. His voice was smooth, but the room no longer leaned toward him. It leaned away. Adrian descended from the dais, every step measured. No, he said. But the seal hidden in her journal is. Nora lifted the broken seal from the box. The silver-bearded councilman took it with reverent hands, examined the mark, and went pale. This is the emergency seal of the Eastern Border Council. It could only be broken by the ranking captain who received her testimony. His eyes moved to Caleb. That was you. Caleb did not answer. He did not need to. The silence spoke for him, and for the first time, Clara saw the man who had shaped her childhood shrink beneath the truth he had once used to banish her. She expected satisfaction. She expected anger to rise hot and bright. Instead, grief came first. It filled her chest so suddenly she could hardly breathe. My mother died thinking no one would ever say her name without shame, she whispered. Adrian turned to her at once. The court faded from his face, leaving only the man beneath the crown. I should have found you sooner. Clara looked at him, and the pain in his voice was almost too much to bear. Did you look? For years, he said. I was told the child had died beyond the border. I was shown a grave. The words landed between them like another burial. A fake grave. A false ending. A kingdom taught to forget while a mother and daughter learned to survive in silence. Clara pressed her hand over the ring in her pocket. Then do not make this about me being chosen, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Do not make it about prophecy, or blood, or what anyone thinks I might become. Make it about her. Marian Whitmore. Marian of the Silver House. The woman they wronged. Adrian bowed his head, not as a king accepting instruction, but as a man honoring truth. Then we start there. He faced the council, and the softness left him without losing its dignity. By royal order, Caleb Voss is removed from border authority pending full judgment by open council. Every sealed record concerning Marian of the Silver House will be brought into the light. Her exile is hereby suspended until final restoration is declared before the pack she was taken from. The elders rose one by one, not in celebration, but in solemn agreement. Caleb was escorted from the hall without spectacle, his protests swallowed by the silence of people who no longer trusted his version of the past. Clara watched him go and felt no triumph, only the ache of years that could not be returned. When the doors closed, Adrian looked at her. There is one place this must be spoken first. Clara already knew. The white willow waited beyond the border road, its roots touched by silver light. Its new grave holding the woman who had carried the truth alone. By dusk, the king's carriage left Blackwood Keep with Clara beside him, not as a prisoner, not as a curiosity, but as the daughter of a woman whose name was finally beginning to rise from the earth. By the time the carriage reached the old cemetery, twilight had softened the snow into blue shadow. The white willow stood ahead, bare branches lifted against the darkening sky, and beneath it Marian's grave waited with fresh earth resting gently over the woman whose silence had protected a daughter and condemned a lie. Clara stepped down before Adrian could offer his hand. Not because she rejected his kindness, but because this last walk belonged to her. Behind them, elders, guards, and witnesses from Blackwood Keep gathered along the edge of the cemetery. No one spoke. Even the horses stood quiet, their breath rising in pale clouds. Clara approached the grave with the silver ring in her pocket and her mother's name beating softly inside her chest. Yesterday, she had crossed the border in fear, dragging grief behind her through the snow. Tonight, she returned with the truth walking beside her. Adrian stopped a respectful distance from the grave and faced the assembled witnesses. The black cloak at his shoulders moved slightly in the wind, but his voice carried steady and clear. Marian Whitmore, born Marian of the Silver House, was exiled under false testimony and sealed records. She was accused without honor, silenced without mercy, and erased from the history she helped protect. Clara closed her eyes. The words hurt, but they also lifted something. Not enough to bring Marian back. Nothing could do that. But enough to let her mother's name stand upright at last. Adrian continued, by royal order, her exile is ended. Her name is restored. Her burial is recognized under Blackwood law and Silver House right. Let no wolf in this territory speak of her as traitor again. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of shame, reverence, and the fragile beginning of repair. One by one, the elders bowed their heads toward the grave. Nora Bell wept quietly, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Clara did not cry. Her grief had gone too deep for tears in that moment. She knelt and placed her palm against the cold earth. "You are home," she whispered. This time, the words did not feel like an apology. Warmth stirred beneath her hand. A silver glow rose softly from the soil, not bright enough to frighten anyone, only gentle enough to be seen. It traced the roots of the willow and climbed into the bark like moonlight remembering its way. The branches shivered though there was no wind, and for one impossible breath, the cemetery smelled of rosemary and warm bread. Clara's heart cracked open. That had been Marian's scent in the exile cottage, on winter mornings when hope was thin but still alive. Adrian came closer then, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. He lowered himself to one knee beside the grave, not before the council, not before the crown, but before Clara. A quiet sound passed through the witnesses. Clara turned to him, startled. His silver-gray eyes held no command. No demand. No royal certainty that her life now belonged to him because fate had written it somewhere before she could read. He looked at her as if her choice mattered more than prophecy. "Your mother brought you home," he said. "I will spend my life proving this kingdom is worthy of you, whether you stand beside me tomorrow or never at all." Clara's breath trembled. All her life, people had told her where she belonged. Outside the border. Behind stronger wolves. Beneath shame. Beneath silence. Adrian offered no cage dressed as destiny. He offered patience. Respect. A place where her mother's name would not have to hide. Clara looked at the grave, then at the white willow glowing softly above them. The quiet wolf inside her lifted its head, not afraid this time, not broken, but awake in a light as calm as the moon. She reached into her pocket and drew out the silver ring. For a moment, she held it between them, watching the black wolf sigil catch the last blue light of evening. Then she closed Adrian's hand around it. "Keep it until I am ready to ask for it back," she said. Adrian bowed his head over her hand, not kissing it, not claiming it, simply honoring the trust she had placed there. Around them, the cemetery seemed to breathe. Clara rose beside him and faced the gathered witnesses with her shoulders straight. She was still grieving. Still uncertain. Still the girl who had crossed miles of snow with nothing but love and a promise. But she was no longer an exile shrinking beneath someone else's story. She had entered the cemetery carrying her mother's body as a forbidden daughter. She left it beneath the white willow as Clara Whitmore of the Silver House, the Omega whose gentleness had healed a king, whose truth had restored the dead, and whose destiny was no longer waiting in the shadows, but walking beside her into the dawn.